Hello everyone and welcome to the Sabbath School panel. This week we are discussing the quarterly Living the Christian Life. Today we will be discussing Lesson 7, The Ribbon of Blue. And on the panel today we have Brother Peter, Brother Marco, and myself, Paloma. And if you would like to study along with us, you can find a digital copy by visiting sdarm.org/publications. There you can find lessons in over 30 languages as well as the past quarterlies. Before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for this day and for all of your blessings that you've given us as we go into this new Sabbath day, and bless us as we go over this lesson, that we may have a good discussion, and bless the people online as well, that they may take something out of this. And forgive us our sins, be with us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
To help us gain a better understanding of what our study will be about, Brother Marco will lead us through a quick review of Lesson 6, Fig Leaves or Lamb's Wool.
Yeah, so we talked about last week, and we talked about what kind of clothing should we have? What should be our goal? And in Hebrews 9:22 it said, "And almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no remission of sin." So in the book of Genesis we have Adam and Eve's case. They've sinned, and God has given them very straightforward direction as to they're supposed to avoid eating of this fruit of this tree in the garden. They have all the other trees, but there was one that they were not supposed to eat. And what was the result of eating this tree? So the result was going to be death. If they were to go ahead and take of this tree, death was going to happen. So now we find Adam and Eve, and they have just sinned. And we also looked at some of the quotes here where immediately after they take of this fruit, they don't immediately feel this sense of dread and guilt. For some time, they feel excited. It feels good after they've eaten this fruit. And for some time, it feels as if though what the serpent had told them was actually true. But immediately after they have this exhilarating experience, they immediately Adam begins to feel guilt and remorse and even fear. And as it was their custom, they would meet with God, and God would come and commune with them. So all of a sudden, after they sinned, they're full of fear. And now God is coming here, and he's calling out to them. But there was a problem. After they sinned, this garment of light that they had immediately went away. And now they find themselves naked and ashamed. And now they're about to meet God face to face. And what was their first reaction?
They went and hid and sewed clothing out of fig leaves.
Yeah. And they tried to cover themselves with whatever they could find. And immediately after they do that, God needs to come God had a solution. And this is where it takes us back to Hebrews 9:22, that in order to cover them, someone had to die. And in this case, God tells them that they're going to sacrifice this lamb, and that because of the death of this lamb, they were now going to be able to be clothed with something else other than what they had actually weaved for themselves. And as we continue to go through the lesson, we stopped in Monday and we talked a little bit more about how they were covered. And when we went to Psalm 104, we wanted to know how is God clothed? Because when we go to Genesis 1:27, it tells us clearly that Adam and Eve were created in God's image. And so when we go to Psalm 104, 1 and 2, it says, bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who covers thyself with light as with a garment, who stretches out like the heavens, like a curtain. So we see that God is covered with light. And in the same way, Adam and Eve were also covered with this. And when we go to the original Hebrew here, the word honor and majesty means dignity and means also authority. So what happened after Adam and Eve sinned? They lose their dignity and they also lose their authority. But now they have claimed allegiance now to Satan. So now what happens later on? We went into Tuesday and we talked about the concept of self-righteousness. And how did Adam and Eve manifest self-righteousness when putting themselves fig leaves?
Well, God first made them a garment of light. Now they had to make their own.
Yeah. So they make their own, And then when we went to the very next question, one of the things that we also learned is that God never rejected Adam and Eve. As a matter of fact, they themselves, they decided they're going to run as far away as they can, hide themselves from God. But God never rejected them. As a matter of fact, he was actually pursuing them so he could actually give them the solution to their problem, which was the sacrifice of the lamb. And when we went to Wednesday, we also talked about the symbol of salvation, which was the lamb. And we also talked about in Genesis 3:15 that God put in Adam and Eve, he put an element. And what was this element, as we see in Genesis 3:15? He puts hatred between the seed of the serpent and also between the seed of the woman. And this hatred was going to allow them to be able to distinguish between what was good and what was bad. And when we went to Thursday, talking about identification, this is even when people of the world were typically dressing more modestly than now, why did God have a special dress for his people? And this is going to be a little bit more of a introduction to the lesson that we were going to talk about today. But in Numbers, there was a specific way that God was trying to distinguish his people from the rest of the world. And we found this in Numbers 15:37 through 41. And what was this distinction between God's people and the rest of the world?
They had a ribbon of blue.
Yes. So this was also a reminder, as we see in Numbers 15:37. It wasn't not only about being modest, but it was also a reminder. And throughout God's commandments, we find a lot this word remember. We find it in the 10 Commandments: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in here, it was supposed to remind them about something very specific. In verse 39, it says, "And it shall be unto you a fringe, that when you look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them, and that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which ye used to go whoring, that ye may remember and do all my commandments, and be holy unto the Lord. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt." Very similar language that we find in Exodus 20. So in this case, their clothing was to be a reminder that they were a commandment-keeping people.
All right. Thank you, Marco, for giving us that review. And now we will go on to Lesson 7, A Ribbon of Blue, and Brother Peter will lead us out.
Well, thank you very much, Paloma. So let's begin with the memory verse here. Marco, if you'd like to read the memory verse, and Paloma, if you can read the note there.
This is, "Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God."
In dress, as in all things else, it is our privilege to honor our Creator. He desires our clothing to not only be neat and healthful, but appropriate and becoming.
All right, so we find here a very basic principle in the Christian life, that whatever we do, we need to do it to God's honor and glory. So in this particular week, we're talking about dress reform. The ribbon of blue, as we learned last week, that it was a point of identification. And so when we're looking at it, when we're dressing, we need to look at whether this is honoring and pleasing to God. Now, we need to understand when we're talking about being honoring and pleasing to God, God is not just there making rules saying, this is what honors me, this doesn't honor me. God actually has a reason. And in the note there are 4 specific things. The note you just read, Paloma, there are 4 specific things we need to look at when we're dealing with dress. What are those 4?
It says neat and healthful, appropriate and becoming.
All right, so number 1, it has to be neat. In other words, something that is decent, something that looks good, okay? It needs to be healthful. That means there's a lot of things, and we'll learn some of the things in this lesson here, that are not healthful. It's against our health. And so when people do it, those things cause them disaster as a result. It needs to be appropriate. I can't be dressed like this and going digging a hole on a construction site. That doesn't make sense. I've seen people wearing a suit on a construction site. Okay, and yes, I saw them digging a hole. Okay, but I'm sorry, that's not appropriate for that time. And what does becoming mean?
Well, becoming is more like, in the Old English, it was used to describe something that is becoming would be something that complements you.
Okay.
So
That's
like,
appropriate to like your age, basically.
yes.
Yeah. So it'll be according to your age and also your station in life, whatever you're doing in life.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're a lawyer, you're not going to be dressed up like
Appropriate to the
something
circumstance.
else. Yes.
Yeah.
So, but also becoming, it shows you it needs to look good on you too.
Complements,
Okay. Yeah, so it's not something that looking ugly. So I often find sometimes people talk about dress reform, and if it looks nice on somebody, they think that's not dress reform. Okay, it has to be also looking nice, so it doesn't have to be looking horrible on you either. So those are the 4 basic principles to honoring our Creator. Number 1, has to be neat. Number 2, has to be healthful, good for your health. Number 3, it has to be appropriate for you in the work that you're doing, and it has to look decent on you as well. It's fitting for you. So the first thing we do need to talk about when we're dealing with dress reform is the issue of modesty. When we're looking at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 and 10, Paloma, if you can read that verse there for us and explain together a little bit here, why is modesty an important part of our Christian responsibility?
So 1 Timothy 2:9-10 says, "In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works."
All right, so why is modesty important for, especially, this is here talking about women, obviously for everybody, but especially to women. At the end of our last lesson, we learned that dress reform happens a little bit more closely to women, affects them more. So why is it that modesty is an important aspect here?
Well, I think, when it comes to dress reform, one thing that you need to look at is the principles that are given to us from the Bible regarding dress reform. And, we already talked about them under the memory text, a few of them, where it's like neat, healthful, appropriate. But when it comes to modesty, so for the verse in 1 Timothy 2:9, I actually looked into one of the words, which I think it was either shamefacedness or sobriety, but the other meaning for that is propriety, which is conforming to conventional standards or morals. So modesty, it shouldn't be something that draws too much attention to yourself. It doesn't have to be plain, but it should also, be appropriate for the occasion, like not showing up to church in, let's say a ball gown. That's not church attire, and that makes you stand out way too much. So that's one aspect of it.
Okay. All right. Of course, they wouldn't be wearing a ball gown because they're not going to go to a ball. So
Exactly, because it's church, not
it's
that.
interesting here. It says, becometh women professing godliness.
Mm-hmm.
So becoming, in other words, it's fitting for a woman. Modesty is fitting for a woman who is professing to be godly. When we're looking at whether we're dealing with dress reform or anything else, Marco, the first paragraph there, under the note there, when we're looking at it, what is God trying to bring us when he brings us things like dress reform?
So the note says, there is a decided contradiction between the love of outward adorning and the grace of meekness, the quiet spirit. It is only when we seek in all things to conform to the will of God that peace and joy will reign in the soul.
So what does it do? So what does fulfilling God's plan bring to us personally?
It gives us peace in the soul. And I think that's why, dress reform is something that's connected to your relationship with God. If you're only focusing on the dress reform without your relationship to God, then you kind of miss the point, because it's a reflection, or that's what it's supposed to be. So if you're not focusing on your relationship with God, then your dress reform probably won't, the way you dress will probably not be up to, what it's supposed to be.
Okay, so you have both angles here, because if you're not dressing appropriately, you're not going to have peace.
Yeah, that's probably an indication that
Yeah.
your relationship with God isn't.
If you're
the
dressing
best.
appropriately but for the wrong reasons, still doesn't give you peace. Neither one gives you peace. So the goal here is to have peace in our soul. When we're looking at modesty, because this is the topic here in this section here, modesty, immodest brings the idea of immorality. And how does the dress itself produce that, both in the person themselves and in other people? Paloma, if you can read the next note there.
The love of dress endangers the morals and makes woman the opposite of the Christian lady, characterized by modesty and sobriety.
Okay, notice here. So it endangers what?
The morals.
The morals. Okay, keep in mind we're talking about, when we talk about God's commandments, we call it what? The moral what?
Law.
The moral law. So therefore what we find here, it's affecting the whole law, not just that. So now let's take a look what happens with our dress. And it's interesting, it affects two groups of people here. Go ahead and read the rest of it.
Showy, extravagant dress too often encourages lust in the heart of the wearer and awakens base passions in the heart of the beholder. God sees that the ruin of the character is frequently preceded by the indulgence of pride and vanity in dress.
So who's affected by the way we dress?
Both.
Both parties.
Okay, so number one, who?
The one wearing it.
The one wearing it. Do you ever think about that? You know, here it says the one who, it's actually encouraging lust in the heart of the wearer. Mm-hmm. So they themselves are getting encouraged. And then what else does it awaken?
Passions in the heart of the beholder.
So it goes on both. Both of them are affected by that.
And it goes back to that it's drawing more attention to you than, you know, what you're there for, which is church. It's drawing away from God and to what you're wearing.
Okay.
And I think here in the note, I think gifts is a key, because the whole issue, I believe, is the love of outward adorning, right? So it's that is that passion to make a statement. And I remember reading, there was this clothes designer, and she went ahead and she was writing an essay, and she designs both, you know, clothing for men and women. And I can never forget what she said. She said that whenever I'm designing a piece, every piece that I design it's a pride and confidence statement for each individual, which means that when we dress, and I think I've heard it a lot of times, that the way that you dress makes you feel good, right? And so because the way that we dress makes us feel good, the emotions that are driving our clothing choices, it's a direct relation to how we're feeling in the moment. And I think talking about fashion is, this fashion designer really put it well. It's all about making a statement. And so when we look at how we dress, we should analyze what statement are we making by choosing this style of dress.
Very true. All right, under B it says, how does emphasis on the outward adorning deprive the inward spiritual? So Apostle Peter there brings about two things. There's the outward, and then there's something else. What are the two things? What's the second thing? So there's the outward, and there's what else?
The spiritual.
The spiritual. He calls it here the hidden man of the heart. And when he compares it, what kind of women were the ones that were dressing modestly and developing the inner person rather than the outward? What kind of person was that? What kind of women here?
Well, in verse 5 it says, "For after this manner in the old time, the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their husbands." So these were women that trusted God.
Okay. So when you're looking at, women that trusted God, they were developing the hidden man of the heart that helps them develop evangelism and everything else. Why does Satan especially deals with women to get them so focused on fashion rather than the inward spiritual?
Well, I think it's one thing that Marco just mentioned, where the verse, they would adorn themselves, being in subjection to their own husbands. But I think it's also that women have a lot more range in what there is to wear. Like, there's a lot more options. I guess even now for men, there's starting to be more options. So both sides can be subject to it, but women still have a much bigger selection to choose from in regards to dress. And so that's what puts them in more danger, I guess.
And the fashions change constantly, okay? So people, you may wear something and then a month later, 2 months later, it's out of fashion. And so you have to try to keep up with it.
And that leads to you paying more attention to your outward appearance. That causes you to neglect your spiritual side. And, that's what Satan wants, to distract you from your spiritual state.
Yeah. Why don't you read the last sentence there on the bottom of the page there?
Satan invented the fashions in order to keep the minds of women so engrossed with the subject of dress that they could think of but little else.
Wow, this is amazing. And you can see that. And sometimes, we have a danger of going to extremes, okay? So we find here it's talking about somebody who is spending so much time on fashion. But some people read this statement, they look at their wardrobe and say, we better do less, we better do less. It reminds me of a person that used to read the statement that our meals on Sabbath should be simpler. And so every time they read it, they simplify their meals. And one day I went and saw them and they were only eating apples. And I asked them, what are you going to do when you read that statement again the next time? Because they've gone so far, they keep reading, we need to be more simple. And they were down to that. So we're not talking about that. So when you're dealing with people being occupied with fashions, that means that they're not thinking about anything else. It doesn't mean that they're not having decent clothing. It doesn't mean that they're concerned about something appropriate. Because when we get there about the Sabbath, for example, we need to be wearing something special for the Sabbath, something appropriate for the Sabbath, because we're coming in the presence of God. Go ahead.
Because then people will look at, what the note was just saying, that people think too much about their outward appearance, and then they go to that extreme, and then they forget about the other, principles of health reform, which was neat and healthful, but also becoming. So it doesn't mean like going to one extreme or the other. There needs to be a balance.
But we also recognize that most people don't go to that extreme. Most people go to the extreme of fashion. That's the extreme that most people go on. So let's keep that in mind. That's going to be the main one that people go to, but some do go to the other one as well. Now, we need to look at another principle on Monday's lesson. When we're looking at dress, we need to consider health. First of all, how does God think about our health? 3 John verse 2. Marco?
It says, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health even as thy soul prospereth.
So how does God consider our health?
God wants us to be healthy people. And I think throughout the Old Testament, we see specifically in the first 5 books of the Bible, God was really, really concerned and gave them a lot of laws that had to do with cleanliness specifically, but also how to be healthy.
Yeah, it's interesting when you go in heathen countries, most countries that are not exposed to Christianity as much. They have other religions being predominant. Most of them are not very clean. They don't have cleanliness as a main part of their belief system. Their health is not number one. And so we find here that God is concerned with our health. When you look at Proverbs, Paloma, can you read that verse there? Proverbs 31, verse 21. It's talking here about a wise woman.
It says, She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. And in the question A, it says that the marginal reading for scarlet means double garments. So here it's talking about, for cold weather, dressing up in more layers and making sure that you don't get sick from the cold weather.
Okay, so we find here that God is concerned for that, and those who are wise, they're going to dress appropriate to the weather. So yeah, they're not afraid of the snow. Why? Because a family can go out in the snow and they're not going to get frostbite. They're not going to get cold. They're going to be able to handle that. So obviously here, when we're looking at God's concerns is for our health. Why is it that God's concern is for the health? Why? What relationship? Because we're planning on going to heaven, and so if we have an unhealthy life here, what does it matter? Because we're going to get a new body and everything else when we in the resurrection.
Well, our bodies are still the temple of God, And it's our duty to keep it healthy so that our soul may also be in health.
Okay, so number one, we're the temple of God, so we need to take care of it, and emphasize that next part. Why don't you read that note there for us, the first note?
The body must be kept in a healthy condition in order that the soul may be in health. The condition of the body affects the condition of the soul. Faithful adherence to right principles in eating, drinking, and dressing is a duty that God has laid upon human beings.
Okay, so the first part there, obviously the relationship between soul and body are very close. So if you're not healthy, if you're sick, how do you feel?
Terrible.
You feel like going to church?
No.
You feel like witnessing? You don't feel like
I
doing
staying
anything.
home the whole time.
Yeah, so therefore, obviously, to be in optimum health is beneficial for your soul. Do you feel like reading when you're really sick?
Nope.
You don't feel like doing anything, okay? That's why we can see that there's a relationship there. And it's interesting there when we're talking about health. Notice here, there are three things that are involved in health, and we usually deal with two of them. What are the three things?
So eating, drinking, and dressing.
Can you imagine dressing is in this list here?
Yeah.
So obviously dress has a lot to do with our health. Obviously, if you are not dressed appropriately, and I've been places where there is snow, and I watched people waiting at a bus stop. I was in Canada, and it's really, really cold. And I'm looking there at the bus stop, and there are these women going to work, and they got hardly anything on. I mean, they're freezing out there, and they think that's a normal part of life.
Yeah. Sometimes I've seen like people just walking around with a t-shirt and shorts in winter. It's like, even if you can stand the cold, that's not very healthy.
That is not. So we need to understand the importance of the two. So when we are looking at principles, how should we look at principles? Like I look at shoes. Shoes are a very important part of our wardrobe. And it's hard for me to buy shoes. I don't like just any shoes. I sit there and try one, try another. When I find one thing that works well because it's so hard to find them, that's the same. I buy the brand all the time. Okay, that's the one I buy. That's it. I just go there and look for that. Okay, don't bother me with anything else. I don't need to look at anything else. I'm there. Okay. So when we're looking for things like whether it's shoes, whether it's other clothing, what should we be looking for, Marco? The second note there under A.
It says, if the feet are clothed with good size, thick-soled warm boots or shoes, for comfort rather than for fashion, the blood would be induced to circulate freely in the limbs and feet as well as in other proportions of the body.
Okay, so when we're looking especially for footwear, what should we be looking for?
Comfort.
Comfort, health.
Now, there's a particular style, and I remember I was visiting Spain some years ago, and I think it was in Castellón, and we had gone over to a restaurant. We had booked a whole restaurant for ourselves, and we cooked our own. The brethren cooked their own food. They just needed the space there at the restaurant, so they booked it all there for us there. And on the way there, from where the church was to where we were going, there was like cobblestones or something like that. And there were these young ladies walking in front of me, and they were struggling. They were really struggling as they're walking along there. And finally, I couldn't resist, and I had to ask them. I said, are you all really comfortable in those shoes? And they said, no, it's miserable. Then why do you wear it? They said, well, it's just our custom to wear it. They said, we wouldn't wear it all week. We just wear it for these occasions. But why wear it at all? When I see people wearing especially high heels, because those are very dangerous for one's health. Okay, it throws the spine out. I've known chiropractors that they actually like women wearing high heels. It's good for business.
Yeah, that is like standard in a lot of businesses today. But I actually not too long ago saw a video of this girl who she would go to work every day, and she had heels. They weren't very high heels, just about this high, but they were heels, and she'd wear them every day. And it got to a point where she couldn't stand like with her feet to the ground because it was actually uncomfortable since her calves were so used to, being in that position. So, heels occasionally, it's I think it's fine, but if you're constantly wearing them, then that's bad for your health and it's bad for your posture, and you can get problems for sure.
Well, let's take a look at that one verse there. Why don't you read that verse and tell me what does it sound like when it describes in Isaiah chapter 3, 16 and 17, when it talks about the daughters of Zion here, and just tell me what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts.
So it's interesting here. So what does that sound like?
Well, it only mentions like the feet once, but yeah, it's probably something having to do with the way they walk.
Well, let's talk about, okay, so when you're looking at high heels, okay, let's just look at, it mentions there the feet, yes, making a tinkling with their feet. But in order to wear high heels, what happens, have you ever tried standing on high heels without moving your neck?
Like walking?
No, just standing.
You mean like
I
moving the
haven't
neck?
thought about it.
You should try it sometimes.
Like, what do you mean moving your neck?
Okay, so you keep your neck in the same position and you move your feet up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen?
Oh.
You're going to fall over.
Wait, so if you move your neck?
That's how you keep it balanced.
Oh, okay.
That's the stretch forth neck part.
Hmm.
You
Oh,
got to
yeah.
move your neck out. So that's why it affects the whole spine. So when you wear high heels, the back, the pelvis has to move forward, and the neck has to move back.
Yeah, it puts you in like
for
a
balance.
forward position.
Yes, because otherwise if you just go straight up a bit, you're going to flip out. You're going to fall right down.
Yeah, because you have to keep your balance.
So to keep balance, that's how it messes up your whole back. So if it's doing that, why would you do it even occasionally? I mean, why would you do something that is putting so much stress on your whole body, even occasionally?
Well, like, I didn't mean high heels, if that's what you're referring to.
But I'm just looking at because again, we're talking here
Yeah.
about comfort rather than fashion. And fashion says, yes, this is what you wear. And like they said, those girls there in Spain, they told me that, it's very uncomfortable. But they're doing it on special occasions. Why? Especially if you're coming into God's place. Why would you do something like that? So let's move on a bit here, but I want us to think when we're talking about health, because God's concerned for our health. And when your spine is out of place, there's a lot of people, they have struggling with childbearing years. A lot of it has to do with that. There's a lot of issues that are developed as a result of that. And why, Satan obviously has done that to torture people. Why do we allow him to torture us? Now, the next section there talks about cleanliness. In Exodus chapter 19, they were getting ready to go to Mount Sinai. And so what did God tell them to do before meeting with him?
So here in Exodus, he pretty much told them to wash their clothes. And it says, and the Lord said unto Moses, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes and be ready against the third day. The third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all people upon Mount Sinai.
So did God tell them to do that just because they're coming to meet with him, or because also it had a benefit to them?
Both, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's both. Because even when you take a shower, you feel like a new person, especially if you've been working out in the sun. So imagine I think it's just a process. It would affect their emotional as well. They were meeting God. They were going to be in this special occasion, and cleanliness was part of it.
It's
So
interesting how God works. He makes things that are good for us a part of his religion. Yeah, coming to meet before God, yes, you need to be clean, but it benefits you as well. God gives you a double benefit in following His will. So yes, you would not come in stinking clothes to meet somebody special. You would never do that. But at the same time, by cleaning your clothes and your bodies, it is beneficial to us. Notice the note there. Who wants to read that note there under B? A great amount.
A great amount of suffering might be saved if all would labor to prevent disease by obeying the laws of health. Strict habits of cleanliness should be observed. Many, while well, will not take the trouble to keep in a healthy condition. They neglect personal cleanliness and are not careful to keep their clothing pure. The impurities of the body, if not allowed to escape, are taken back into the blood and forced upon the internal organs.
Okay, so both if you don't take a shower regularly, but if your clothes are full of filth like that, what happens?
Well, you look bad for one.
Yeah, you look bad for one, okay? They smell you before they see you, okay? But what else? What does it do to you personally?
Well, the impurities go back into the body.
It goes right back into the body. Okay, and then what happens when these impurities come back into the body? Marco, if you want to continue. Effort. Nature really.
Nature, to relieve herself of poisonous impurities, makes an effort to free the system. The effort produces fevers and what is termed disease. But even then, if those who are afflicted would assist nature in her efforts by the use of pure soft water, much suffering would be prevented. But many, instead of doing this and seeking to remove the poisonous matter from the system, take a more deadly poison into the system to remove a poison already there.
So people get disease from what?
From not taking showers.
Yeah, that you're not taking a shower, not keeping the clothes clean.
Yeah.
I remember when COVID started, people telling everyone, wash your hands and do this, that, and that got people washing their hands more, but you had the impression that not everyone was doing that already in the first place.
Yeah, because people get accustomed to not doing things. You're right. So it was important to do that. I know I did it more frequently than ever before. I know during that time I was washing all the time.
Or you were more intentional.
Yeah, it was more intentional to make sure that you wash several times and everything else, okay? But that cleanliness is really important because that stops the spread of disease. One of the first things that you do when a place is full of disease, I was just listening to a story of a lady, she was a missionary to India. And she'd go to a place and they say this person's sick, very sick. And she comes there, first thing she has to do is clean up the house, clean up the clothing, clean up everything. And she wasn't a doctor or anything, and yet just cleaning up made a big difference in helping people out. And that's something important that we could do, really important for us. Now we go to the next part here. You have Jezebel. What did Jezebel do when she thought she had something important to do? What did she do?
She painted her face.
Wow. Okay. So, and what do we have what do we have today that people do on a regular basis?
Makeup.
They use makeup. Okay. So, why is it that someone uses makeup?
I don't know. Hide skin imperfections.
Cover up imperfections, or because they feel like their face isn't pretty enough. So
yeah, I've
it's
seen
insecurity, or
that
they want to feel more confident. I think is a better way of putting it.
But you got hit the nail on the head. It's insecurity. I've seen some really beautiful women, and what do? They got to sit there and put all this stuff on their faces. And I've known people, when you know them for over a number of years, that later on in life, guess what? Their skin is a mess. Why? Because they've been putting all this stuff on them. And what principle can we learn if we truly learn well? We're not going to be using makeup. There's a Bible verse there listed there. Ecclesiastes.
He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end.
Okay, so God made everything how?
Beautiful in his time.
So if we understand God's natural beauty, we're not going to need those type of things. Those things will not be necessary. And when we look at makeup itself, especially when you look at some of the ingredients in makeup, Paloma, can you read that last note there? What happens by the use of cosmetics?
Many are ignorantly injuring their health and endangering their lives by using cosmetics. When they become heated, the poison is absorbed by the pores of the skin and is thrown into the blood. Many lives have been sacrificed by this means alone.
Many lives what?
Sacrificed.
Can you imagine? A lot of people have lost their health, lost their life even, because of use of cosmetics. Because again, keep in mind, those are chemical things.
Well, one thing I just thought of now is that some companies test on animals. So that should say something about the effect that it has on you, that they won't even test on people.
And those that they do allow on people, are they necessarily healthy? Obviously not, because a lot of them have brought about premature disease. So now, let's go back to the next let's go to the next question here on Tuesday. We're dealing with the natural order in clothing. What is one biblical principle that people are having a struggle with today in society today? What is that?
So in Deuteronomy, it says that the woman shall not wear that which pertains unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. So one of the things that we see, especially in society today, is more of the blurring of the lines between, the distinction between a man and a woman.
Gender-neutral clothing.
Gender-neutral clothing, and it's becoming quite popular, and it's all about blurring those lines, not having a distinction.
That's correct, and it's true that we need to understand something. I realize in time past, women were treated poorly. Well, let's understand it, okay? They didn't get the same wage for the same work. There was a lot of things at play that were designed to keep women in slavery. And in some countries, even the way they have they can't get an education, they can't do all those things. But women then, to counter that, ended up going to try to become like a man. And that's where the blurring starts happening. And they're not realizing that one thing wrong does not produce the benefit they desired by going to the other thing that was wrong. And so when we look at God's plan, because here it says that a woman should not wear that which pertains to a man, and a man should not wear a woman's garment. Why? What are they to God?
It's an abomination.
Abomination. What is abomination?
Sin.
It's a sin, yes. It's a sin, but it's a sin that God intensely hates. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so let's take a look at some of the things here, especially today, because we do have that the world and society is going to become more and more like the time of Sodom, where they had immorality and homosexuality and all those type of things. And how does the clothing we wear affect that? Plum, if you'd like to take the first note there.
God designed that there should be a plain distinction between the dress of men and women, and has considered the matter of sufficient importance to give explicit directions in regard to it, for the same dress worn by both sexes would cause confusion and great increase of crime.
So what does the same type of clothing worn by men and women do?
It causes confusion.
Causes confusion. This is why, you have a lot of boys growing up, and they don't know if they're a man or a woman.
Yeah. And also, I feel like one thing becoming more common now is, you could be walking down the street and you look at someone, you can't tell what they are because of the way, not just the way they're dressing, but the way they made themselves look.
So together with that, it causes confusion, and it increases what?
Crime.
That's an amazing thing. So there's a lot of criminal activity that is going along with this. And a lot of times the ones that are getting criminally acted upon are children. So all this confusion is making it more dangerous for children to grow up in the world.
And I think going back to the verse where we talk about, us dressing, becoming, one of the things that we've seen even in society today is the over-sexualizing of children specifically, and also the way they dress. I mean, you see, very young girls, 11-year-olds, dressing like
Like adults.
like an adult, like an 18-year-old would. And this is also one of the biggest reasons for the increase of crime nowadays.
Absolutely. So let's be a little bit more specific. So let's read, if you can read that note, Marco, in wide contrast.
It says, in wide contrast with this modest dress is the so-called American costume, resembling very nearly the dress worn by men. It consists of a vest, pants, and a dress resembling coat, and reaching about halfway from the hip to the knee. This dress I have opposed from what has been shown me as in harmony with the Word of God, while the other I have recommended as modest, comfortable, convenient, and helpful.
Okay, so this American costume, they would wear what? The women would wear
Pants.
a vest, a pants, and a dress that was like a coat, but it came about halfway down to the knee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what was this considered?
Well, it was called
Immodest.
yeah.
It's
the
an
American
immodest, okay? So imagine that, wearing pants without even the dress halfway down to the knee. What would that be considered? Okay, so this is considered immodest. And when we're looking at it being immodest, this type of clothing for women, what actually is happening? Paloma, if you can read that last note.
God's order has been reversed and his special directions disregarded by those who adopt the American costume. I was referred to Deuteronomy 22:5. God would not have his people adopt the so-called reform dress. It is immodest apparel, holy and fitted for the modest, humble followers of Christ.
So when we're looking at this issue, because this issue keeps coming up over and over again about women wearing pants. And I mean, today, understand something, in society, men are starting to wear dress. That's this whole sexual revolution, that they're wearing all sorts of things. They want to be more effeminate. So that's coming along the way too, and we know that's wrong. What about women wearing pants? Notice here that in the American costume, and that's they're still wearing a dress. The American costume has something that resembles like a coat, but it's like a dress that comes halfway down to the knees. And this costume, this American costume, it says God's order has been reversed. Reversed based on which Bible verse?
Deuteronomy 22:5.
Okay, so when people are talking about Deuteronomy 22:5, it has specifically to do with women wearing pants.
In regards to that, I just wanted to say something which was, from what I learned when looking at this verse was, when talking about things referring to dress and looking at verses that talk about dress, it's always important to look at context. And in this context, it's what we were talking about before, that cross-dressing is abomination, which is like, trying to dress as the opposite gender with the intent to look like them. And here they were about to enter the land of Canaan, and cross-dressing was a common practice among pagan religions back then. And that's what Moses was warning them against. And the reason that I feel like it doesn't necessarily talk about pants specifically is because, that wasn't common dress back then. So I think this speaks more to like the context of that time, but like it still applies, but in a different way, I think.
Well, keep in mind that when Sister White was writing this, it's from a woman's perspective. Volume 1 would have been in the 1860s, and that's when women did begin wearing pants. And so here was the introduction of something called the American costume. And she is specifically addressing the American costume. And the thing there that made it objectionable was the pants, that made it look like that of man.
Well, and also the coat reaching halfway above the knee.
That was the dress part. And that was still immodest. So what happens if you remove the dress part?
Well,
Then it's still immodest.
Yeah.
It still makes it immodest.
But that also brings up the point that it's not specifically just pants, because there are many dresses and skirts that are just as, if not more, immodest than pants. And obviously I'm not saying, start wearing pants to church. I don't think that's proper either. But I think, circumstance also has to be considered, because, I've heard many examples of, you're going hiking somewhere or like swimming, and in cases like that, a skirt can almost be improper. Because
Yeah, and there's some places none of us should be hiking. Okay, so understand something, what's the purpose of a hike, you see? So, but understand what it says here. She was, okay, so let's look at this again, the statement here. And actually, let's look at the one that we had at the beginning. God designed that there should be a plain distinction between the dress of men and women. So there has to be a plain distinction. And when you're looking at women and men wearing pants, there's not much of a distinction there.
There still is. I mean,
so let me,
a guy can't wear women's pants. It won't fit.
Yeah, but okay.
I mean, I see your point, but yeah.
No, but that's what it says. There has to be a plain distinction between the two.
right. And the way that I see it is that we have to go back to the principle. So let's assume, talking about the pants, in a man and the pants in a woman. One of the biggest things that the Bible brings out was the modesty part. We have to cover the nakedness, and that was. We see this principle throughout, even in the Old Testament. So when even looking for clothing that is appropriate for the occasion, we also have to make sure that we're following this principle. So bring it to the pants, right? So take for example, if let's say a lady we're supposed to use a pants, proper for the occasion, what would be the distinction between a guy's pants and a woman's pants? Generally speaking,
less pockets.
Huh?
Less pockets.
Well, yeah, less pockets. But
Yeah.
then the other one would be, usually the pants that you would find for the ladies will be leggings, none of which is modest.
Yeah, those weren't the ones I was referring
Right.
to.
So those
I agree
are,
on that.
Yeah. So those are the principles that when choosing our dress also have to apply, and I think we're going to get into it.
Okay, but look at this part here. Okay, so first of all, there has to be a plain distinction between the dress of men and women, okay? So if you're telling men's pants versus women's pants, I'll tell you what, you'll have to start looking very closely to be able to start looking at the differences. Okay, it's not going to be very plain, okay? Now, notice here, back in that last verse, God's order has been what? Reversed, okay? And his special direction disregarded by those who adopt what? The American costume.
Mm-hmm.
That American costume is specifically offending Deuteronomy 22:5. It's specifically addressing that. And it is immodest and wholly unfit for the modest, humble follower of Christ. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's not going to leave you much room. Now, that brings us to the next point here. And the next point is, what effect does wearing pants have on women, for example? Go ahead and read that note there, the last note there, those who feel.
Those who feel called out to join the movement in favor of women's rights and the so-called dress reform that adopts the American costume might as well sever all connection with the third angel's message. The spirit which attends the one cannot be in harmony with the other.
So what's the spirit? Continue.
The scriptures are plain upon the relations and rights of men and women. With the so-called dress reform that adopts the American costume, there goes a spirit of levity and boldness just in keeping with the dress.
Okay, what does it increase?
Levity and boldness.
Okay, how does that fit in with 1 Timothy where it says modest, shamefacedness, and sobriety? It doesn't. Continue.
Modesty and reserve seem to depart from many as they adopt that style of dress. I was shown that God would have us take a course consistent and explainable. Let the sisters adopt the American costume and they would destroy their own influence and that of their husbands. They would become a byword and a derision.
So the problem when you're looking at this whole issue with the American costume, that was the time that they were introducing a form of pants. They were not men's pants, by the way. Okay, they were in appearance like men's pants. That created that difficulty. And that clearly, from what we can see here, affects the way we're dealing with Deuteronomy 22:5. It does fit into it. And that's why we need to be very clear on that. Otherwise, we're causing that confusion. I know we need to move on, but it is something important for us to consider when we're looking at some of these statements. Now, we need to look at some other aspect here under Wednesdays. What other issue is there in appearance? Now, this is not dealing with dress. Now, this is dealing with appearance. And what is the appearance? What does 1 Corinthians 11 bring as a distinction?
It says, "Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering."
So here we're dealing with what now?
Hair.
Hair. And that what, in the same way, what should there be a distinction between?
Men and women in hair.
And it's dealing with what? Length of hair, isn't it? Obviously, there has to be a distinction between men's hair and women's hair as far as length is concerned.
So I do have a question with this verse. So I've heard people say that, this verse is referring to a certain group of people, and like that also similar verses talk about how women should have their head covered, even though, that's not something we do today. So
Okay, so notice here, so you had, obviously, he is dealing in Corinth, so they had all sorts of experiences there. Sometimes in some of those heathen cultures, they shaved even women's hair and things of that nature. So notice the last verse, verse 15. What does it say? What is given to a woman for a covering of her head?
a covering.
Okay, so her hair is given her for a covering. So if a woman has long, and it's her long hair, by the way, it says there, her long hair. So, so when a woman is wearing long hair, that is her covering on her head. She doesn't need a cloth covering or anything of that nature.
So in that time, like, women wearing cloth over their heads, that was more like a tradition.
No, but sometimes also it was required because, so for example, if a woman has just been converted and she had her hair cut off before, what is she going to do while her hair is growing out? She's going to cover it with something. So there were some traditions that had that, but specifically here, and in the Bible you find sometimes a covering of the head meant one thing, and another time it meant another thing. So there were different times where culture changed. But specifically from a biblical perspective, if a woman has long hair, that is her covering. She doesn't need anything else. And we're talking here about going into worship. We're talking about in the place of worship. Okay. So there has to be that distinction between the two. So yeah, so she did have a head covering, and especially if they had hair that was shortened for whatever reasons that they may have had. And this is why, again, when we're looking at the next paragraph there, we're dealing with what God pronounces abomination. This is Deuteronomy 22:5, dealing with that. Can you read that for us, please?
There's an increasing tendency to have women in their dress and appearance as near like to the other sex as possible, and to fashion their dress very much like that of men. But God pronounces it abomination. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel and with shamefacedness and sobriety.
Okay, so you find here very clearly that there is a clear distinction between men and women. There has to be that, and you're finding men and women in their dress and appearance as near like the opposite sex as possible. So they're trying to do their best to make it look like the opposite sex. So it didn't say here that it is the dress of the opposite sex, but in appearance, in dress and in appearance. And the appearance there...
Yeah, with the intent to look like the opposite sex.
To look like that, yes.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem that you're finding here. And the next part there talks about the way people are judged is by the way they dress. Paloma, can you read that note there?
Under A?
Yeah, a person's character.
A person's character is judged by his style of dress. A refined taste, a cultivated mind will be revealed in the choice of simple and appropriate attire. Chaste simplicity in dress, when united with modesty of demeanor, will go far towards surrounding a young woman with that atmosphere of sacred reserve, which will be to her a shield from 1,000 perils. Okay, so clearly here it's going to give her protection, but what is it? Not just the way she dresses modestly, but what? She has to have a demeanor. It's her attitude. You can be dressed properly and you have the wrong demeanor. It don't matter. It's going to still have problems. Okay, immorality has been a problem all the way through the centuries, and they were not always dressed inappropriately. Again, it has to do with their demeanor.
So before we continue on to B, just looking at all of these things that we've been talking about on dress, whether we're dealing with the issue of pants or whether we're dealing with the hair, length of hair and everything else, it's obviously talking about certain locations. And when we're dealing with that it has to be neat and healthy and all these things, for example, we're not talking about women wearing pajamas, for example. You know, we're talking here about the public. We're talking about the public environment. So whether somebody is wearing their pajamas or not, that's not your normal public environment. So that's not what we're talking about here. We need to keep that in mind. I know some people, they got all excited because one sister, she ended up, she got up in the morning and she went outside to go check her mail and she was still in her pajamas and they got a little too excited over that. I'm not talking about things like that, okay? We're talking here about your normal public environment. And speaking of public environment, when we talk about the church environment, we're talking about something different. You know, so you have your normal public environment when you are working in your backyard, for example, and there's nobody around. You can do what you want. I don't care what you wear there. I don't care what you wear inside your house, okay? Now there's a lot of things that we're talking about different places. Now in B, we're talking about coming to church. Now coming to church has a different environment. And what are we talking about what example do we have of the angels, for example? What happens when angels come into God's presence?
They have to cover themselves.
So how do they cover? Can you explain to us Isaiah chapter 6?
Well, it says that the seraphims had 6 wings, and 2 wings covered the face, 2 covered the feet, and the other 2 they used to fly.
Okay, so here they're coming into God's presence. It's simply showing that they are looking at a different way. It doesn't mean that we're covering our faces when we're coming to church. But I can guarantee you, if you came into the actual personal presence of God, we're going to fall down. And like all the other people in the Old Testament, when they came in the literal presence of God, they fell down, they covered themselves completely. Okay, but we're coming before God, in a sense, in church environment. So obviously there needs to be something different when we're coming to church. Marco, if you can read that first note there for us, explaining a little bit about the church environment and how we should come before God.
So it says, many need instruction as to how they should appear in the assembly for worship on the Sabbath. They are not to enter the presence of God in the common clothing worn during the week. All should have a special Sabbath suit to be worn when attending service in God's house. While we should not conform to worldly fashions, we are not to be indifferent in regard to our outward appearance. We are to be neat and trim, though without adornment. The children of God should be pure within and without.
So explain that to us a little bit.
So, I mean, from what I gather here is that I believe that God is a God of good taste. And it reminds me of when we go to the New Testament and we see how Jesus said that not even, Solomon in all of his greatness, he was able to adorn himself like the lilies. And when we go to nature, I think we get a really good sense for what a true adornment and really good taste is all about. And here, that's exactly what it's talking about. It's saying that when, coming to Sabbath, we should have a special, some special attire that we use in order to come, in the presence of God, a special suit or a special dress. And while we're not supposed to adopt, the fashions of the world, we also need to be mindful that we need to look good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
And I think if fashions of the world, they change all the time. And sometimes things come into fashion that don't contradict our principles. Like sometimes skirts might be more in fashion. And if they're modest skirts, we shouldn't seek to look different just because it's what's fashionable. If the fashion isn't contradicting anything, then there's there shouldn't be a problem with it.
Well, of course, yeah, fashions do change, and there are some fashions that when it's time, you need to buy for the next few years because it's not coming back around again.
That's true.
For a while. But one thing that we can learn here clearly is that we do, when we come into God's presence in church, we do need to come specially. It has to be something special. It cannot be the common clothing during the week. And I noticed in a lot of churches today, they're trying to become the same as during the week. They want to come with a t-shirt, they want to do whatever. Again, that is not respecting the presence of God. They say, oh, we want to be just like everybody else. Well, you're not just like everybody else because you're coming before the King of the universe. You're coming before someone special, and our clothing needs to show that.
And just to bring out here this close relationship of the statement that we make when we, how we dress. In the last part of the note, it said the children of God should be pure within and without. So just like the Israelites, when they were coming in the presence of God, they had to cleanse themselves. They had to clean their clothes before they came to the presence of God. This same reminds us that not only are we supposed to put a lot of thought in the way that we dress, but we also have to remember that we also need to be pure within. And the only one that can make us pure within as pure without is Christ. And we see that lesson, going back to the previous lesson, looking at Adam and Eve after they sinned.
So not only coming to church needs to be just outward. There is outward, but if you don't have the inward purity, you can forget it. Just the same thing with dress reform. If you don't have the inward cleansing, you can forget that too. Paloma, can you read that last note there? Because it kind of emphasizes a little bit more on that.
Under B?
Yes.
God purposed to make the occasion of speaking his law a scene of awful grandeur, in keeping with its exalted character. The people were to be impressed that everything connected with the service of God must be regarded with the greatest reverence. The Lord said to Moses, "Go unto the people, then sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. During these intervening days all were to occupy the time in solemn preparation to appear before God. Their person and their clothing must be freed from impurity, and as Moses should point out their sins, they were to devote themselves to humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that their hearts might be cleansed from iniquity."
Can you imagine that? They're coming before God for what purpose? Did you notice that? When they were coming before God, what was Moses doing to them? What was he pointing out to them?
Their impurities?
Then notice there, look at that. It says here, as Moses should point out their sins. So when we often think about coming to church, we think of praise, we think of worship, we think of having a good time, a social environment, which is good to have a social environment. But we find here that sometimes coming into God's presence means to have our sins pointed out.
Which is uncomfortable. This reminds me of remember when the woman is caught in adultery. We could have imagined that if she was definitely caught in adultery, she was definitely not dressed modestly. And yet, Christ reaches out to her, and I think this is a very beautiful lesson that we see in, as Moses is preparing the people to meet their God. Like you said, this process was a very uncomfortable process because it meant that there were some things that had to be changed.
So outwardly they were to take care of things, but inwardly, I want you to still remember that woman that was caught in the act of adultery was actually appreciative of Jesus. He could have really tore her to pieces, but he did it in such a way to save her soul. And I think that whenever we're dealing with even sensitive subjects, and that you can't be more sensitive than being actually caught in the act of adultery and dragged there in front of the public and said, here's the woman that did this. Of course, the man they didn't bring out. They forgot all about that part. Okay? But Jesus was caring more for the soul than all the outward stuff. And so here, when we're talking about dress reform, I hope that we are not going to be so concerned about the outward that we forget the person. The person needs to be saved. The person who is in the wrong, dressing inappropriately, they need help. But as we're looking at last week's lesson and this week's lesson here, we find that there is a way to do things on the part of God that brought salvation to the world. And here, yes, they needed to be having humiliation, fasting, and prayer when he presented to them their real character. So now let's go back again now to the issue of separation, because we talked about that last week. In question 5, what must we realize about worldliness and why is it such an attraction? So when you're looking at worldliness, first of all, we need to understand its relationship with God. James 4, verse 4. Paloma, can you read that there for us? James 4, verse 4.
It says, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God."
So when we're dealing with worldliness, and again, whether you're dealing with fashion, this particular week we're dealing with dress, but it's all worldliness. We've been discussing before about gossip, for example. That is also an abomination. Lying is an abomination. All of these things are
Sowing
an abomination.
discord.
So you can't just limit it to one thing. And so whatever we're doing, we need to remember that we're here, that all worldliness is enmity with God. And we need to repent and come to the Lord as a result.
And I think the main thing to keep in mind, and I think the most important thing regarding dress reform, is that at the end it should all point to God and it should all glorify God. Like we said earlier, the way you dress is a reflection of your relationship with God. You can't just have dress reform. The relationship with God needs to come first. And if we're keeping those principles in mind, and if we're not letting this, it's the same thing like with health reform. A lot of people tend to, focus on the certain things about it and miss the point. But if you're focusing on the why and that it's for your benefit and focusing on your relationship with God, then, you're going to focus on those principles as well, and you're going to follow them as they should be.
Okay, so again, the focus needs to be on God and on Christ, but the natural change will take place. I've actually had studies with people when we didn't deal with dress reform, we dealt with conversion. And as we started studying the Word of God and they began accepting the Word of God, I noticed that they began to change the way they dress.
Exactly, that's how it should be.
Yeah, it wasn't even, okay. And then eventually they had, we need to have a study on dress reform. We need to have a study on this. But they're actually practicing a lot of it already because that change takes place. But we need to understand, sometimes people don't change their dress simply because they are not actually understanding the principles very well. So, Marco, if you can read that note there for us, because we need to understand what is it with the nations of the world, with the churches in the world, why is it that there's enmity between the two? Go ahead and read that.
So it says, like all the nations, the Israelites did not realize that to be in this respect unlike other nations was a special privilege and a blessing.
Okay, so let's just stop right here before we move on here. So when you're looking at not to be like the other nations was actually what?
A blessing.
It was a good thing. They were thinking, we want to be like the other nations. Let us have a king like the other nations. Let us do this like the other nations. And Samuel said, come on, the king's going to tax you to death. And they said, that's what the other nations are doing. Okay, so they're not understanding things and realizing, and if we would realize that God's rules are actually for our blessing, to be different from the other nations, not to be a slave to fashion, not to be a slave to all these things, that's actually a blessing. To be healthier because of the principles of dress reform. Go ahead.
God had separated the Israelites from every other people to make them his own peculiar treasure. But they, disregarding this high honor, eagerly desire to imitate the example of the heathen. And still, the longing to conform to worldly practices and custom exists among the professed people of God. As they depart from the Lord, they become ambitious for the gains and honors of the world. Christians are constantly seeking to imitate the practices of those who worship the God of this world. Many urge that by uniting with worldlings and conforming to their customs, they might exert a stronger influence over the ungodly. But all who pursue this course thereby separate from the source of their strength, becoming the friends of the world. They are the enemies of God. For the sake of earthly distinction, they sacrifice the unspeakable honor to which God has called them, of showing forth the praises of him who hath called us out of darkness into his marvelous light.
So in reality, when we're talking about evangelism, you're trying to get close to people, but not to become like them. If you're trying to become like the people, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
Because what they were missing out was that the source of their strength was God, who was separate from them, from the world. So we need to keep that in mind. So, when we're looking at all of these things, I think some of the things that are more challenging in life, not just spiritually, but even in life, when you have something very challenging, what helps you is to keep your eye on the goal. And what is our goal, according to B there?
So 1 Corinthians 2:9, it says, "But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him."
So I want you to think about heaven for a moment. Just imagine the best imagination of what heaven is like. Picture everything, whatever you want. And guess what? You're not even close. You're not even close with that best imagination of what God has prepared for us. And so when God asks you to do something, sometimes we don't understand it. Sometimes we're missing the actual point, because sometimes, we're like children, you want to give them something good, but they need to wait, but they don't want to. They want this right now. And so sometimes you have to help them wait. But if they learn to trust you, they're going to say, okay, by waiting, I'm going to get something better. God has something better prepared for all of us. And so sometimes if we have a sacrifice to make, and that sacrifice seems so big, think about the ultimate goal that God has for us. So if we want to summarize these last week and this week, because both of them were dealing with dress reform, I think the best way we can summarize it is that the true principles of dress reform, to any sensible human being, they will make sense. They make sense. They make it look like it is that it is something worthwhile. That's what it is. That's what dress reform is. And if we understand its principles, we need to explain the benefits, not just the rule. If you're just saying don't do this, but if you're not showing a person what the benefit is, when somebody comes and wants to sell you something, what did they share with you? They don't tell you how much it costs. They try to avoid the cost, actually. They tell you its value. And when you understand this is the value here, and the cost is this much, well, it's not too bad, because you're getting the value. And so we need to sell dress reform because of its value, not because of what it costs.
So this reminds me of the experience that Solomon has, with the Queen of Sheba. During his reign, when he was close to God, this was when all the nations around the Israelites knew who God was, because of the amazing things that God was doing for the nation. And when we go to 1 Kings 10, we see the Queen of Sheba coming, and the Bible tells us that all of her questions were answered, and she was amazed. But one of the things that actually caught her attention, when we go to verse 4, these are some of the things that mesmerize the queen. And in verse 4 it says, "When the Queen of Sheba saw all of the wisdom of Solomon and the place he had built," so she was looking at the structure, "and then the food at his table," so she was looking at the food that they were eating, and then it also says, and the seating of the officials and the attending of the servants and their clothing. All this combination. The Bible says at the very end, it says that she was overwhelmed. And in other translation, it says that she was left without breath. So the way that Solomon's people were dressing were a statement to this queen. And the Bible tells us that after she leaves, she knew that God was their God. And she's amazed. You know, the gospel was preached to her. She was influenced, and she goes back to her country excited.
So it's important for us, for people to see us, that we really love serving God. The question is, do you love serving God? You know, are you looking at these rules and you're looking at, is somebody following the rules? Is somebody else not following the rules? What are the people doing? Or are you enjoying the law that God has given to you and appreciate the value in it? That is what's going to attract people to this. And so whether it's dress reform, whether it's any of the other reforms that we're talking about, there has to be a change in the human heart. And may God help us that that change will happen in us fully and that we may truly walk with Him. Let us pray. Our gracious, loving Father in heaven, we're so thankful to you for your many blessings. I'd like to thank you because you care for us. Thank you that you have given us these wonderful laws. Help us that we may understand them personally in our heart, and that we may be able to apply them in our lives, and that people will see that we have been with Jesus, and that these rules are higher and better than what the world has. Lord, forgive us for neglecting these things. Forgive us for being so attracted to the world that we've forgotten that you have a better place prepared for us. Help each one of us, especially if someone is here listening right now that is struggling with some of these issues, that they may understand that true peace comes in surrendering fully to Jesus Christ as our Savior. Cleanse our heart and help us to walk with you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. We want to thank you for joining us today, and we would like you to join us again next week as we study Wedded to Christ. God bless.